Hey, group leaders. All right, I wanted to download some stuff that I've been working on myself a lot. Pastor Bill and I have been talking a lot about this, even our staff. And so I want to share something with you. I figure we'll call this Theology Thursday. This will be Theology Talks with Pastor Matt. I want this to go maybe 10 or 15 minutes. This is just sort of a midweek, later in the week, ability to just reach out to you guys and share some more with you as you are disciple makers here at our church. Let me read a very familiar verse to you. This is from Matthew 28. We'll start at verse 19. It says, "All authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit." Verse 20, "Teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So I'm probably as guilty as anyone else about stopping on 19. And 19 really, if you're going to boil it down to a single statement, going to make disciples is the purpose of the church. Now, but in verse 20, it actually gives us a little bit of instructions on like how we're to do that. So teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. The church's job is to teach disciples to observe all that I have commanded you. So it's a pretty powerful statement. It's a pretty weighty statement. You and I have the responsibility to teach all that Jesus has commanded. I mean, that's a tall task. And people like to debate, like, oh, well, does that mean if I don't do everything Jesus commanded, do I lose salvation? No, that would fly in the face of a lot of other things that Jesus said. John chapter 6 is a wonderful example that you can't snatch. Jesus can't have those that are his snatched away from him. It does outline some pretty intense detail, though. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? Well, we're supposed to be teaching all that that he has commanded. So part of, like, when you study in Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about gifts to the church. And it says that we were given prophets and apostles, evangelists, pastors, shepherds. Some of those are used interchangeably. Some pastors have multiple giftings. The pastor I grew up under undoubtedly was both a shepherd and an evangelist. And so he had two of the giftings to the church. But they're all gifts given to the church for the sake of edifying the church and building the church up. At the end of chapter 4, you'll see that, like, the point that Paul makes there is that healthy churches should grow. And the pastors and the prophets and the apostles and the evangelists and the shepherds and the teachers, these are all tools given to the church so that the church would grow. And part of the calling of the pastor is to teach proper doctrine to the people. We have to teach what the scriptures actually say. You and I that are involved in disciple making are supposed to be adhering to Matthew 28:19. We're supposed to make disciples. This is for all disciples. From the very beginning of Christianity, being a disciple meant making disciples. And so that's why you're even on this email thread, is that you've stepped over into becoming a disciple maker. And so we have the task of teaching them all that Jesus has commanded. We have to observe that. So we as believers have to observe it, and us as teachers have to teach it. It's a part of the Great Commission that we don't always remember to teach people. So that's kind of the how. Let me share with you just a little bit. So there's a very specific method for making disciples that Jesus used. It actually was called the rabbinical method. It wasn't new. We could argue that he invented it because he created the whole world. But it's something that rabbis had done for a while. They did it in 3 stages. So let me share just a little bit with you. In stage 1, we would call it declaration. And so all of us at some point that would sit here and say that we are a Christian, we declared Jesus as Lord. There was a point in our life where we were not a follower of Christ, and then we became a follower of Christ. So stage 1 would have been a time where Jesus asked them to declare him as Lord. Stage 2 would be development. Now, most of you know his ministry was about 3 years long, and most of what you and I are going to read about in his ministry is all about the development stage. And so, and development kind of works in 2 sub-stages. Development is look at what I'm doing and see how I'm doing it. Bringing the disciples to the wedding feast at Cana, Jesus does his very first miracle. He turns water into wine. And notice he actually sends the servants to go get the water. It's possible that some of the disciples went with them, but it's not likely. This was a very early point in his ministry. It was likely that they would be observing what he was doing, and it was an opportunity for him to teach them about who he was and what kind of power he had, and the state of godness that he had that the world didn't really understand yet. Even his mother, he's like, it's not time yet. So he's revealing a portion of his nature in this moment to them. Now, later, he starts doing things like letting them do ministry while he's supervising. So, for example, Peter fails like he normally does. He tries to walk on water. He falls. He's soaking wet. And at the end of that story there, when he's done being soaking wet, they come up on the shore and they start ministering to people right away. And Jesus is there with them. He's ministering with them. So he's moved from, I'm going to develop you by you watching me, to moving to a point of development where, hey, let's do ministry together. And then he ends up sending them. And so we know even before his own death, he starts sending them to go preach into the towns and be an evangelist to the people. And he's like, this is not going to go all that well, and they're going to reject you. And if that happens, knock the dust off your sandals. And so there's this process in stage 2 where they're being sent from, hey, see how I'm doing it, do it with me, now go and do it on your own. Now, part of being a rabbi was, the whole point of rabbi, the translation is teacher. And so to be a teacher, he would have debriefed with them then. And so they would have had a conversation. How did it go? Where do you feel like you need help with? What did you mess up with? I hope you're seeing the connection here on how easily this translates into, like, this is how we should be making disciples. Now, the reality is that you may have people in your group that are not believers. You may have folks in there that truly have not hit that stage 1. They've not declared Jesus as Lord. The chances of that are smaller. The reality is, at very least, they probably think that they're a follower of Jesus. But the majority of folks that are in your group or your class are probably going to be declared followers of Jesus. The Bible talks about wheat and tares, and that they could grow up together. Really, we don't know. The only evidence we have of any of salvation is the fruit of the Spirit. So this isn't really a conversation about determining whether or not they're saved. What I'm saying is, we probably should assume that the majority of them are believers and understand that some of them are not going to be. But most of the folks that you're working with is in stage 2. Consider your stage 2 development process. Where are you at? Here's one of the reasons why we don't want you to lecture every week, all week, forever and ever, amen. If you're only ever doing, you're never going to fully develop stage 2. If all you ever do is teach, there's a time for teaching, and teaching is really important. But if all you ever do is teach, and you never deploy them on their own, you never do anything with them, you never send them out on their own, give them a chance to fail, we really will never move to the 3rd stage of discipleship, which is true deployment. And so at the end of Jesus' life, we know that he ascends to the right hand of the Father, and it's done. Training's over. Development is done. It's time to go spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. Acts chapter 1, verse 8. And so ultimately, here's the target we're running towards. You and I should be prayerfully considering that the people in our groups should get to the point where you are. And Lord willing, beyond where you are. Because I hope that you don't stay where you're at either, and you continue to grow as well. So we all need to get to a point where we can be deployed. We need to be deployable Christians. That means, like, we need to know how to win people to Christ. We should be actively involved in sharing our salvation. You should be sharing your story with people you meet. I hope that all of you at some point in your life, sooner than later, get to experience the joy of witnessing to someone and them giving their life to Christ because you shared your story with them. Or better yet, beyond even your story, God uses your story, but you point blank call them to a point of salvation. That's not something that was reserved just for the preachers to do. This is the whole church. All disciples should be involved in this. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. It was not a call just to the preachers. It was a call to the church. So if you're holding them back, and I'm using teaching as a very easy example, you guys need to be serving together. If you're never serving together, you're not developing in that stage 2 portion of what it looks like to develop your people. If it's only ever you downloading and you pouring into them and you guys not sharing ministry together, you're really robbing them of an opportunity to develop. there's going to be people, and some of you already have several of these in your group. Honestly, there's probably some of you that have group leaders in your midst that need to start their own groups this next time we do groups. But they need to be deployed, and we need to follow up with them. We need to be able to check in and say, hey, how'd it go? Oh, this was a really rough one. Okay, well, here's how I would do this. I have conversations every week with group leaders who are maybe first-time group leaders, or maybe they're still new. It's in their first year or two, and they said, look, I had a hard situation. How do we deal with that? This is the point of pastoral leadership, and this is why we're here for you guys. This is why I'm here for you guys. There's going to be stuff that you need us to have your back on as a church staff, and that's what we're here for. So do the same. Replicate that process, because ultimately we want our people to be deployed. Think about in 365 days this year, if every person in our church won just one person to Christ, our church would double in a year. I mean, just one. I mean, I don't feel like there's any implication there in Matthew 28:19 that says, like, if you have time, if it's convenient, just one a year. I mean, there is a sense where if you were here this last Sunday, Pastor Jason Stockton expanded on how fast the church grew in the first several hundred years. It was incredible. And the reason it did that is because all of the believers, not just the professional ones, shared their faith. It would be, I said this before in a sermon, but I'll say it again. If we were to double in a year because every one of our believers shared their faith with another and brought another person into our fellowship, there'd be people all over the country wondering what we did. And they would feel silly, and we would probably feel silly saying, like, we just did the gospel. Like, we literally just did what the Bible said to do. So that's the 3 stages of development. I'll end this video here in just a minute. I got another one I'm going to produce for you in just a few moments. I think it's going to be a blessing to you. I think it's going to be a resource to you. Consider where you're at. Excuse me. Stage 1, have you come to the place where you've declared Jesus as Lord? I hope that you have. If you have not, come talk to me. You are probably not going to be the best to lead the small group if you've not declared Jesus as Lord. But I trust that you have. There may be people in your group that have not. Don't miss the opportunity to see that and let your spirit speak to you. If there's a check in your spirit where you're like, I don't know if this person is a believer. If you need my help, that's what I'm here for. If you need Pastor Bill's help, that's what he's here for. But God has not ordained only a few to be able to share the gospel. You may have an encounter this semester where you're able to share the gospel with that person and you lead them to Jesus. That would be incredible. The next thing is look for your development. We need to immerse them in the Word. So don't stop teaching, don't stop leading. But don't be afraid to let someone else take the reins. Let the conversation go longer than you're comfortable. Call on people to read Scripture. Ask people what they think about that. What does that mean to you? And start to guide them. Be doing ministry with them. If you're not serving in a ministry at church, I can't encourage you enough to do that. You're missing some of the best parts of this Christian life if you never serve another person. You and your small group, take a ministry together. Go. There may be a Sunday where you bless everyone in the nursery and say, hey, we want to relieve you. Go talk to Missy. Line that up. They would be thrilled because so many times they're not even in the service. There's so many different ways you could serve here. If you're not sure of all of them, come find me or any of our staff. We'll tell you more about them. As you're serving with them, send them out. I hope that there's a time where you're able to share your faith with group members, family members, or some of your group members, neighbors. Teach them how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, come to us and we'll train you how to do that. And then send them out. Challenge your group to be sent out. And so finally, we want the mark of a mature disciple is someone that can multiply other disciples. We have to be able to deploy our people. So those are the 3 stages of discipleship. That's exactly how Jesus did it. That's the rabbinical method that he modeled. It falls right along with the Great Commission and how we were taught to go do it. So this is your aim as a group leader. Discipleship is more than a class. It's more than an hour in a home. It is an intentional, life-on-life, centered around the gospel, rooted in a deep calling to be obedient to the Scriptures, and then ultimately it multiplies, it replicates. The real discipleship doesn't stay small, it grows bigger and bigger, and the kingdom expands. I hope you guys are having an awesome day. Love you. Let me know if there's anything I could do to help you be more successful than you already are. God bless.